My parents thought I was the family failure. They never knew I was a federal judge. My family saw me as the quiet one, the one who never quite measured up. They never knew the truth about who I'd become, until a single, horrific night forced my secret into the light. That night, my sister's desperation created a reckoning for us all. My family viewed me as the quiet one, the perpetual underachiever. They had no inkling that I held a federal judgeship. To them, I was simply the one who hadn't finished college. That perception shattered the night my sister, Genevieve, struck a man with my car, left him injured and bleeding in the street, and then, impossibly, smiled. Who would ever believe you, she'd sneered. That cruel challenge marked her ultimate undoing. Before the flashing blue and red lights of the patrol cars even pierced the living room window, my mother's hands clamped down on my shoulders. Not a comforting touch, but a possessive, almost desperate grip, as if she were seizing an object she owned. Just tell them you were driving, she instructed, her voice unnervingly calm and flat. It was the same tone she reserved for mundane commands: clear the table, stop embarrassing us, be useful for once. She spoke as if asking for a salt shaker, utterly detached from the reality of a man lying wounded just miles away, or the police lights now painting streaks across our home. Across the room, Genevieve stood by the fireplace, wrapped in my rain-soaked coat. Water dripped steadily from the hem onto the pristine Persian rug. Her mascara had streaked in two perfect, deliberate-looking lines down her cheeks, the kind that always photographed well. She managed a visible tremor, just enough to convey distress. My father paced behind her, his phone clutched like a weapon he hadn't yet deployed. "This incident cannot tarnish your sister's reputation," he declared. "She has major endorsements scheduled next week. No inquiry about the victim's condition. No suggestion of calling an ambulance. Only endorsements. Next week." I stood in the center of that room, stripped of my coat and my car keys, a chilling realization dawning on me. In a mere 17 minutes, my family had confirmed a long-held belief about me: I was the one designed to bear burdens. I was the resilient one, as they'd always termed it. Meaning, she'll recover quickly. Meaning, she has nothing significant to lose. Meaning, we don't need to dwell on the personal cost to her. I allowed my mother's hands to remain on my shoulders, my face carefully blank, a habit ingrained from years past. Let me explain their perception of me, and I'll be fair, they weren't entirely without reason. Eleanor Reed, 29, a college dropout, the quiet sister. The younger daughter who, to their knowledge, folded sweaters at a mid-tier department store downtown, drove a practical silver sedan with 70,000 miles on it, and lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment. No roommate, no visible social life, no romantic partner worth mentioning at family gatherings. I had indeed left college at 19. I'd also adopted my maternal grandmother's maiden name, Hayes, for professional purposes. I never offered my family explanations for either decision. This silence, combined with the visible facts of my life, forged a narrative they found comforting, a cautionary tale, proof that not everyone was destined for greatness. The kind of daughter whose name you mentioned with a sigh, quickly diverting the conversation when guests probed further. Genevieve, meanwhile, was their shining star. 26, 3 years my junior, she exuded an almost palpable aura of success. Rooms seemed to brighten when she entered. A track scholarship had funded her undergraduate degree, followed by a law degree, and now, a campaign for the state assembly. That campaign had garnered 3 local news features, a spread in a regional magazine, and an impressive donor base that included 2 congressmen and a tech mogul who'd sold his last company for $400 million. "She is precisely what this family is capable of," my father would often declare. He said it at dinner parties, at Christmas celebrations, and once, during a toast at a party, while I stood just 6 feet away, glass of wine in hand. He hadn't lowered his voice or made any effort to include me. My mother simply touched his arm then, a gesture that meant, not now, but never implied that his statement was untrue. Yes, they believed I folded sweaters. That was the extent of their knowledge. What they didn't know was why I'd left college at 19. It wasn't failure, but an acceptance into a highly competitive, accelerated dual degree program at a different university, under my grandmother's surname, Hayes. The acceptance letter had arrived via certified mail, and I had made sure to intercept it before my mother ever saw it. They remained unaware that I had completed both degrees in just 4 years, all while working full-time. I hadn't told them, and they hadn't bothered to ask. Over time, that silence had hardened into a tool I found surprisingly effective. They didn't know about my 2-year clerkship with the Honorable Justice Alastair, a federal appellate judge. They didn't know I'd passed the bar exam on my first try, scoring in the 94th percentile. By 26, I had been appointed to a federal district court seat, directly recommended by Justice Alastair herself, filling a vacancy left by a retirement. So, while my parents were painting me as a cautionary tale at their dinner parties, I had already been wearing a federal judge's robe for 3 years. 4 days a week, I presided over a courtroom, issuing rulings that fundamentally impacted people's lives, their freedom, their finances, their children. I had a dedicated law clerk, Julian Hayes, 24, and incredibly sharp, who would send me meticulous daily case briefings at 6 each morning. I already knew he was destined to become a formidable attorney within a decade. And my sensible silver sedan? I drove it because I genuinely liked it, and because I had no desire to flaunt prosperity for the benefit of people I only saw twice a year. I never shared these details with my family because I was waiting for them to inquire. They never did. Silence, you see, can be remarkably revealing. People tend to speak their true thoughts quite openly when they believe only the furniture is listening. The evening it all unfolded, I was home by 8. It had been an exceptionally long Friday. Arguments in a civil forfeiture case had stretched 3 hours past schedule, and I'd spent dinner at my desk, poring over final briefs for a federal contract dispute. I was halfway through my second cup of tea when a text from Genevieve arrived at 8:43 p.m. "Hey, I'm in your neighborhood," it read. "Can I borrow your car for an hour? Mine's making a weird noise. Just a quick run to the pharmacy and back. Your spare key's still under the mat, right?" I began typing a reply. A faint unease prickled at me. Genevieve lived 40 minutes away, and the pharmacy a block from my building had closed at 8. But I'd been awake since 5, and my weary brain had begun its usual trick of blurring the edges of details that should have stood out. Before I could finish my message, she was already gone. I knew this because a GPS notification popped up at 8:51 p.m., my car, speeding north on Ashford Avenue. I reached for my coat, only to realize it wasn't on its hook by the door. I grabbed a fleece instead. I called Genevieve's number, it went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. At 9:04 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert I hadn't seen in the 18 months since I'd had the system installed, Judicial Vehicle Incident Alert. Impact detected. Location, Meridian and 14th, time, 9:02 p.m. I stood in my kitchen, fleece jacket on, and reread the notification 3 times. Then, I called Julian. He answered on the first ring. "I saw the alert," he said immediately. "I'm already pulling the feed." "What's the status?" I asked. 40-second delay on the live stream, he replied, a slight pause as I heard keyboard clicks. "Pulling it now. 1 impact. Driver's side front panel. Hard brake after. Door opened at 9:04. Another, longer pause. The driver didn't stop, Judge Hayes. My chest felt a sudden, profound chill. Vehicle restarted at 9:05. Moving toward your registered residential address. The other party? I asked, my voice tight. I'm trying to locate them. Yes, Julian confirmed. A male, appears to be down in the road. I'm calling 911 on the second line right now. Don't disconnect, I ordered. I won't. I slipped on my shoes and requested a rideshare. On my phone, I watched the GPS tracker show my silver sedan arriving, parking, and its engine shutting off at my building's address. The car pulled in at 9:17 p.m. I arrived 14 minutes later, at 9:31 p.m. Genevieve was already inside. My coat was draped over Genevieve's back, its sodden hem creating a small puddle on my entrance mat. My parents, who resided 40 minutes away, had seemingly materialized in my living room, summoned within the 12 minutes separating the impact and my arrival, as if by some emergency crisis management protocol. My father was engrossed in his phone. My mother moved toward me the instant I stepped inside, her hands finding my shoulders even before I could remove my shoes. "Just tell them you were driving," she repeated, her tone insistent. Now, about the moment that followed, the slap. I want to emphasize its significance. It wasn't the most terrible event of the night, nor even the worst thing said in that room, yet it distilled everything with chilling clarity. It was a single, undeniable data point in a lifetime of ambiguous family dynamics. Immediately afterward, my father ceased his pacing. Genevieve's lips twitched, not in horror, but in a practiced, fleeting micro-expression that she instantly smoothed into a more appropriate mask. The fireplace clicked. The clock ticked on. My mother, in a voice barely above a whisper, murmured, "You're being dramatic." Then, Genevieve took a single step forward, still dripping rainwater, and stated, "It's her car, her license plate. She lives alone." She tilted her head in that familiar, calculating way. "No one important is going to miss a depressed shift worker if this gets ugly." My father heard her. He considered it. "Genevieve has built an empire," he announced. "You, Eleanor, have always been resilient." Resilient? Their word, hung heavy in the air. My gaze drifted to Genevieve, specifically to the cuff of my coat on her right wrist. A tiny shard of clear plastic, sharp-edged and slightly curved, clung to the wet fabric. It was the distinct type of fragment that shatters from a headlight lens upon violent collision with an unyielding object. I saw it. I said nothing. I was trapped in a room with a woman who had just committed a felony hit-and-run in my vehicle, her parents actively pressuring me to assume the legal consequences, and a crucial piece of physical evidence clinging to my own clothing. My phone vibrated. Then again. And again. I let it buzz. I began to observe the room as I would a courtroom, mentally assembling the evidence, noting what was present and what was conspicuously absent, understanding that every word spoken from this moment forward would become part of a record, whether they realized it or not. My phone vibrated a fourth time. I glanced at the screen. The first 3 alerts were routine GPS position confirmations, standard system follow-ups after an incident flag. The fourth was from Julian. Vehicle feed preserved and back to secure server. Audio archive intact. Victim located. Conscious. EMS en route. Call when able. Audio archive intact. I read that chilling phrase twice. My car, you see, was equipped with an internal audio system. This feature had been installed after a disconcerting incident where a man, angered by one of my civil asset rulings, had waited outside my building with a printed copy of the decision and a handwritten note my security team deemed a credible threat. The system recorded cabin audio from the moment the ignition turned on until the engine powered off. It was encrypted, sent directly to a secure server, and flagged for Julian's monitoring queue. Genevieve had taken my car at 8:51 p.m. The impact occurred at 9:02 p.m. 11 full minutes of audio existed before she struck a man and drove away. I didn't open the audio file. Not yet. Instead, I opened the GPS log and turned my phone around, displaying the screen to my family. 9:02 p.m., impact detected. 9:03 p.m., hard brake. Vehicle stationary. 9:04 p.m., driver's side door opened. 9:04 and 38 seconds p.m., driver's side door closed. 9:05 p.m., engine restarted. 9:17 p.m., vehicle parked. Residential address. My mother sank heavily onto the edge of the coffee table, dislodging a mug. Cold coffee began to spread, a dark, slow stain across the rug she had been so meticulously protecting all evening. "What is that?" Genevieve demanded, her voice now brittle, stretched thin like overworked fabric, though still controlled. "It's what happens," I calmly informed her, "when you borrow a federal judge's car without bothering to ask what advanced security systems might be installed." A profound silence enveloped the room as my words sank in. Then, 3 forceful knocks reverberated through the front door. Let me describe the sequence of events as I opened that door, because the order truly mattered. First, 2 patrol officers in rain-darkened uniforms stood before me. Behind them, 1 step back and to the right, was a U.S. Marshal, Thomas Reyes, 14 years of dedicated service under his belt, assigned to the district court security detail. Rain glistened on his jacket, and his face held an expression of careful, professional neutrality. He looked directly at me. "Judge," he stated, a single, respectful word. Behind me, my mother's hand flew to her throat, as if searching for something precious she had suddenly misplaced. My father turned from the window, his expression that of a man whose stable footing had just vanished. Genevieve made a choked sound, not quite a word, merely the initial shape of one, her mouth forming before her voice could properly engage. Marshal Reyes peered past me into the room. "Your Honor," he said, "the victim is conscious. EMS has him on Meridian. We need to speak with Miss Genevieve Vance." The patrol officers stepped inside. Genevieve immediately launched into speech, too quickly, with the practiced cadence of someone ready for a version of this moment, but not this specific one. "It was an accident. I was scared. I panicked. I was going to call. I know people." Her hand gestured toward my father. "People who can sort this out. Who understand this was a misunderstanding. That intentions matter. That my career is." Every sentence she uttered sounded worse than the last. The first officer, a woman whose nameplate read, Officer Hernandez, took Genevieve gently but firmly by the arm, guiding her toward the door. My father started forward, then froze, his attorney's instinct and his father's instinct apparently locking in a tense stalemate. Genevieve glanced back at me from the doorway. "You ruined me," she accused, her eyes dry. The mascara lines on her cheeks remained perfectly intact. I realized then she hadn't shed a single genuine tear all night. Her earlier display had been purely decorative. "No," I replied, my voice steady. "You recorded yourself." The door clicked shut. A particular stillness settled over the room after the door closed, the kind of heavy quiet that descends when a deeply held, very loud assumption abruptly departs the space. My father remained by the window. My mother hadn't stirred from the coffee table's edge, her hand still at her throat, the cold coffee relentlessly spreading toward the rug's intricate fringe. "Why didn't you tell us?" my father finally asked. His voice was altered, smaller, completely devoid of the architectural confidence that usually framed his sentences, the innate certainty of a man who knows his exact standing in every room he enters. I almost chuckled, not entirely without malice. "You never bothered to ask who I became," I stated plainly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Just then, my phone vibrated with Julian's second notification, cabin audio file attached. Recording begins at ignition, 8:51 p.m. Duration, 11 minutes, 22 seconds. Flagged for content. Please advise on chain of custody. Flagged for content. Julian Hayes flagged things only when they were profoundly significant. In 18 months of working together, he had flagged 14 items, 12 were procedural, 1 a genuine security concern, and 1 had led to a referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office. He had never once used the phrase, "Please advise on chain of custody." I looked at my father. "You should leave," I told him. "Eleanor," he began. "My name, in every room that truly matters, is Judge Hayes," I interrupted, placing my phone, screen up, on the table between us. "The officers are outside. I suggest you speak to them before you speak to anyone else." He gazed at me for a long moment, long enough for me to understand that, perhaps for the very first time, he was truly seeing me, recognizing a person entirely self-made, a version of his daughter that had constructed herself without his awareness during all the years he had been looking in other directions. He turned and left. My mother rose from the coffee table. She looked at me, opened her mouth, then closed it, picked up her purse, and followed him out. For the first time all evening, I was alone in my apartment. I picked up my phone. I didn't play the audio file right then. I must be careful with what I disclose, as elements within those 11 minutes and 22 seconds are now central to an active criminal proceeding, severely limiting what I can say publicly. What I can reveal, however, is this: Genevieve was not alone in that car. There was a second voice, belonging to someone whose presence I hadn't known about, and whose involvement in the night's events provided a context that, when Assistant U.S. Attorney Aisha Khan reviewed the file the following Monday morning, caused her to lean back in her chair and quietly tell her co-counsel, "Well, this changes everything." I'll share what Julian told me when I called him back at 11:47 p.m. that night. There's a conversation in that recording, he said, that starts approximately 4 minutes before impact, and it doesn't sound like two people who are surprised by what's about to happen. For a long time after Julian's call, I stood at my kitchen window, gazing out at the city lights. The days that followed possessed a unique quality, one I find difficult to convey to those outside the legal profession. It's the specific sensation of time passing while something you inherently know to be true is formally established as provably true, an entirely different proposition, demanding a patience that doesn't come easily when you are personally involved. Detective Sergeant Rojas, with 19 years in the city's Central Precinct's Traffic Crimes and Hit and Run Unit, took my formal statement that Saturday morning. She was 51, efficient, and regarded my judicial appointment with the precise professional respect of someone who has testified in court often enough to hold strong opinions about judges, and was clearly reserving hers for later. She asked precise questions, meticulously writing everything down by hand, in addition to her recorder. She was, I noted, exactly the type of investigator I would want on a jury. At the conclusion of my statement, she informed me that the victim, 37-year-old Samuel Thorne, a structural engineer walking home from a late dinner, had sustained a fractured tibia, 2 broken ribs, and a concussion, but was expected to make a full recovery. She delivered this information plainly, factually, not as a source of comfort, and I appreciated her candor. The GPS data was formally entered as Exhibit A. The encrypted dashcam footage, authenticated by both the system's vendor and Julian's meticulous preservation documentation, became Exhibit B. The headlight shard, carefully retrieved from my coat's cuff and bagged and tagged by Officer Hernandez at the scene, was Exhibit C. The cabin audio file, transferred through a formal chain of custody procedure Julian had initiated within 40 minutes of the incident, was Exhibit D. Assistant U.S. Attorney Aisha Khan, 36 years old with 11 years in the Federal Public Integrity Division, became involved once the cabin audio was reviewed and the second voice was identified. I won't detail that identification here. However, I will say it escalated the case from a standard state hit-and-run charge to a federal matter encompassing obstruction and potentially conspiracy. When the formal indictment was filed 6 weeks later, it contained charges far beyond what I had ever anticipated that night, when I first turned my phone's screen around to my family. My own position as a sitting judge involved, even tangentially, even as a victim, in such a proceeding, mandated a review. This review was conducted by none other than Justice Alastair herself, my former mentor. She called me one Wednesday evening. In her characteristic way, she stated, "You conducted yourself properly. You preserved evidence. You did not interfere with the investigation, and you recused yourself appropriately from any parallel matters. The review will reflect that." Then, without formality, she asked, "How are you?" I admitted I was sleeping in 4-hour fragments and living mostly on cereal. "That's normal," she assured me. "It gets more normal." Now, this next part of the story is the most challenging to articulate clearly, because it delves into the deeply personal, less a linear sequence of events and more a tangle of emotions, my family. Within 48 hours of that traumatic night, my parents each retained separate attorneys. I learned this from my own counsel, Vivian Albright, a civil and criminal defense attorney with 22 years of experience. I'd engaged Vivian not because I needed legal defense, but because I needed a seasoned advocate in my corner, someone other than Julian, who, at 24, was doing his best to mask how overwhelmed he was by the entire situation. Vivian reviewed everything and confirmed I was entirely clear of legal fault. She also observed that my parents' swift, separate retention of lawyers spoke volumes about the state of their marriage, a condition that likely predated this night by several years. I hadn't requested that insight, but I found it undeniably accurate. My father called me once, 8 days after Genevieve's arrest. He claimed he had been unaware of Genevieve's deeper involvement. He insisted that the idea for me to take the blame had originated with my mother, and that he had only gone along with it out of panic. He apologized, speaking with the measured tone of someone delivering a prepared statement. Then, he paused. And in a different, softer voice, he added, "I should have asked about your life." "Yes," I confirmed. "I didn't think you'd want me to," he offered. "That was your assumption to make," I retorted, "not my burden to correct." "He hasn't called again." "Not yet. I suspect he's Slowly working up to something, in the deliberate way people approach things they've meticulously avoided for years. I'm not actively waiting for it, but I'm not entirely not waiting either. My mother and I have not spoken since that night. She sent a card, a physical card in an envelope addressed to Eleanor, in her distinctive handwriting. I opened it. Inside was a brief, 6-line note, structured entirely as a justification for her actions. I read it twice. Then, I placed it in a drawer. I'll decide what to do with it later, a phrase I've learned is quite useful for matters I don't yet possess the emotional distance to fully resolve. Genevieve's campaign officially concluded the Tuesday after her arrest, her campaign manager issuing a terse, one-paragraph statement citing personal circumstances and withdrawing her from the race. The 3 local news features about her transformed into 4, then a regional outlet published a longer expose that, in its second sentence, used the phrase, sitting federal judge, igniting the kind of media attention neither my family nor my professional life had ever before demanded. My communications director, yes, I have one, her name is Chloe, and she is incredibly competent and remarkably unflappable, spent 3 days fielding incessant calls. I released a single statement confirming my full cooperation with law enforcement and my recusal from all related proceedings, then declined further comment on the grounds that the matter was sub judice. All the endorsement deals Genevieve had secured before her campaign imploded were promptly terminated. The tech founder's legal team sent a brief, pointed letter. The congressional donors fell silent. Those who hadn't yet contributed simply never cut their checks. The campaign account, according to a finance report filed just before her withdrawal, contained $214,000. What becomes of that money is now a complex negotiation between lawyers from 3 different sides, in rooms I am not privy to. Samuel Thorne, the structural engineer with the fractured tibia and broken ribs, filed a civil suit. Vivian tells me it will undoubtedly settle. She outlined the probable range of outcomes. I expressed my hope that he would receive compensation truly reflective of the injustice done to him. Vivian looked at me with that particular expression attorneys adopt when a client utters something truthful but strategically unhelpful. I am now back in my courtroom. I had been absent for 2 weeks, a standard procedure during the judicial review. Those 2 weeks I spent eating cereal by my kitchen window, poring over the briefs Julian brought me each morning, and finally, truly sitting with the profound knowledge that a night I never planned for had irrevocably ended the version of myself content to remain invisible. On that first morning back, I drove my repaired sedan into the parking structure, rode the elevator to the 4th floor, donned my robe, and walked into my courtroom at 8:57 a.m. Julian was already at his station. The attorneys for both parties in the morning civil matter were seated at their tables. The clerk called the room to order. Everyone rose. I sat down. The room followed suit. I glanced at the case file before me, a contract dispute, mundane, the kind of matter that demanded attention and fairness, nothing more dramatic than that. And I opened the file. This judicial life, this was always mine. I constructed it quietly, brick by painstaking brick, during all the years my family's attention was directed elsewhere. While they were busy telling dinner party guests that I was resilient, I built this existence, without their awareness, without their permission. And I am profoundly glad I did. One final detail. The cabin audio file. Exhibit D. That 11-minute, 22-second recording, flagged by Julian for its critical content, contained within the first 4 minutes and 8 seconds before the impact, a distinct conversation between 2 individuals in my car. They were discussing precisely what they intended to do, and how they planned to handle the aftermath. I cannot elaborate on that conversation here, the case remains active, and I am legally constrained. But I will tell you this, when Assistant U.S. Attorney Aisha Khan played it for the grand jury, the room fell into an absolute hush for the entire 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Afterward, the foreperson, a 63-year-old retired high school principal named Arthur Finch, turned to the prosecutor and simply said, "Play it again." She did. The indictment that followed listed 9 separate counts. Genevieve had dismissed the potential victim in my living room, rain still dripping from my coat, claiming no one would believe a depressed shift worker. She was correct, in a way. No one would have believed him, just on his word. But the recording believed him.